So starting with where should you look? My top recommendation, especially if you are new or intermediate with livestock, is to find a farm that you have a connection to, whether that is an experienced friend or neighbor, a contact through your local 4-H and FFA organizations or your extension service if they have them. We'll be covering multiple species tonight, and even within species, there are a lot of different breeds and purposes versus, dairy versus market or fiber animals. And so checking those breed association lists or fiber groups is another great way to find a reputable source for livestock. And also there are some or other organizations like the Oregon Sheep Growers. They have an online directory and they might be able to help you find some local breeders as well. So that's kind of the best place to look to start with, especially if you're newer, because these people who are going to be recommended to you are typically going to be trusted, involved in the industry. If they come recommended, it means that could get around if they have a deal that's maybe a little more shady or something. They're a lot less likely to do that because their reputation is on the line. They might have a website, lots of information, a lot of pictures. These are all really good signs for places to look. And yeah, like I mentioned before, involved in the community and a lot less likely to scam you. And some people might not be trying to actively scam you. They just might not be aware themselves. And especially when it comes to conformation or animal health, this stuff's really important. So it is important to get from experienced livestock producers. Another option, and I hope all the pictures are coming up there, is the internet. Of course, we live in the world of the internet, and with websites like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, a lot of classifieds websites, there are a lot of livestock available. For work, we often post like events such as the livestock webinar series in community groups and farm and livestock forums. And there are a lot of animals that get posted on those sites with a lot of pictures. And I just always caution people to be wary, ask a lot of questions, always request to see the animal in person, but also on the farm. Don't meet somebody somewhere where they're just going to pass the livestock off to you. You want to see other livestock on the farm. You want to see their facilities. You want to see the pens. And I mentioned here that a good deal is rarely a good deal. And what I mean by that is if there is an animal that is a lot cheaper than the rest, somebody says they're really going to give you a bargain on this, you're going to pay for it in some other way. So it's pretty important to do your research, check around, see how, if you're wanting to buy a Bordeaux, check around and see what prices are for Bordeaux's. And you want to make sure that you get kind of something in the average price range. Again, if they're real cheap, they might be coming with some hidden issues that you might not be aware of. And again, you can kind of tell, there are some clues that you can take from these posts. Might have to do with the condition of the pen. Of course, for us in Western Oregon, you can't always help rain and mud, but can give you some clues as to how the animals are being cared for. Are they taking care of mud manure management, pen management? Somebody who takes really good pictures of the livestock, pictures from the side, pictures in front of them, behind them, or up above them, typically is going to have a lot more experience than, some pictures. As I was checking around today for some examples, it'll be a blurry picture from far away. You could totally go see that animal, ask a lot of questions, but I'd kind of rather buy from somebody who knows what the angles to take pictures at and presents, livestock has some experience there. So just some things to think about. The last one that I'll mention here is sale yards, auction yards. I really would not recommend this for the beginner. It's really going to be used mostly for livestock brokers, packers, people with feedlots. These animals are typically animals that have been culled from other people's herds. And through the sale yard process, they're potentially exposed to many different diseases as well. So not necessarily something you want to bring onto your farm. If you do, I do have an example. Growing up on our pastures, often my dad would go get grass calves from the sale yard, and so he'd go and get some, steers that were kind of on the smaller end. They were cheap, and he can put them out on the pastures over the summer, fatten them up a little bit, and sell them for a little bit more at the end of the year. I don't recommend this for everybody, but my dad did go with a friend and neighbor who was a livestock broker and had somebody kind of help him through the process, because it's also loud and confusing and there's a process to it. And so, if you get some more experience and that's the method you want to go, just be aware and have somebody who's knowledgeable. Yeah. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes here. What should you look for? So overall priorities when you're selecting livestock, number one is that it's a good fit for you and your property. It's purchased from a well-managed facility. It just kind of gives you some clues into how the animal's been treated and cared for in terms of especially disease and illness prevention. You want to have those animals with good conformation and structure. And then also you want to make sure you are quarantining and monitoring those animals when you get home to follow good biosecurity practices. What I mean by making sure it's a good fit for you and your operation, you need to make sure you have enough free time. If you're new to livestock and you want to get some, really think hard and make a plan about how much time you have available for those animals and how much time and care they require. You want to make sure that you also enjoy the work. I think a lot of times you might have livestock and you're like, oh, the kids are going to love this. They're going to love feeding and caring for those animals every day. I loved it when I was growing up. Your kids might not feel the same way, or your partner or your significant other. You got to make sure everybody's involved. If you need everybody's help, you want to make sure that they have the time and interest as well. You want to make sure you have enough space. There's minimum space requirements for each species of livestock, and it can of course depend on breed and size. And same with the feed. Feed's pretty expensive, so always research how much feed your potential animal is going to require. And with that, same with pasture. Overstocking your pasture and overgrazing it is just going to lead to so many more issues, lower animal performance, higher costs for feed, because you're going to have to feed them extra because there's not going to be enough forage out in that pasture. Might be putting extra money, time, labor into herbicide for controlling weeds. So, do that research there to make sure that you have enough space for those animals. Your experience level, for the first, for a beginner livestock producer, jumping in with a full, like a breeding operation with a bull might not be the first step I'd want to take. Start small and build up as you go with experience. And same goes for temperament as well. If you have less livestock handling experience, you don't want to get kind of a hot animal or one that's easily agitated, harder to work, harder to deal with. Can be difficult. Make sure you have also the right facilities. If you need to work those animals, do you have the facilities and the tools needed to trim hooves, administer vaccines, or if you have to do some animal health work or have a veterinarian out, do you have a place where you can confine them? It's important. And then temperament for location as well. And this it applies more to people who might have to have animals out away from their house, away from where they live. They can't check them every day. But if you have some predator pressure, you might want animals that are a little bit more aware. Maybe they have a larger flight zone, so they might be the first to kind of run away and or protect themselves from predators. So that's what I mean by temperament for the experience and location. So just some basics quickly, some green flags if you're going onto a property, onto a farm to purchase livestock, some things you want to look for. Want to look for overall, positive animal health signs. So that could be a clear nose and mouth, relaxed posture. The animal isn't overly stressed, doesn't seem to have exerted itself just by standing there. They have a fairly clean coat depending on the time of year. The pens, they're not elbow deep in manure and mud. When you see them move, you see them walk out, which is really important. They're walking without pain. Their hooves look like they're in good condition. They're not cracked. And ears and eyes are alert. I think that's one of the first things I notice if there's an animal that is under the weather is you walk into a pen and they don't turn to look at you. It's really important that animals turn and look at you and are aware. Their ears and eyes are alert. On the other hand, some red flags, again, checking for a snotty nose, labored breathing, excessive drool, a hunched posture. A good sign of a sign of a sick animal could be that they're kind of hunched. Diarrhea, if there's evidence of diarrhea on their coat or their wool, it's not a great sign. Sometimes animals do get diarrhea, but when you're buying or selling an animal or purchasing an animal to bring on your farm, something I'd want to stay away from. You don't want the animal to be extremely excitable, agitated, high-headed. You don't want to look at them and they just immediately bolt to the far side of the pen. Not something you want to work with if you're newer to livestock or really in general. Those are kind of animals I would want to cull or sell anyways. But I always start by looking from the ground up. So how do their feet and legs look as they move? Are they limping or favoring any feet? Are there any lesions or sores on the hoofs? Are the hoofs cracked or really extremely long? Because that can affect how they've been walking. If their ears are droopy, that's another kind of first sign of a sick animal. If their ears are kind of droopy, their head's down a little, those eyes aren't alert, turning to look at you. So when you go onto that farm, you want to be able to be in a pen or an area where you can see them walk away from you, walk around all their sides and just watch them move and interact. All right, conformation. Conformation is a general build of an animal, and that's influenced by muscling, structural shape. It's really just how the animal looks, how balanced it is. These traits are highly are most likely heritable. Some are highly heritable. If there are conformation issues, those problems get worse over time. And so we'll get into it in a little bit, but if there's an animal that's bow-legged or down in their pasterns, if you can notice it now, it's just going to get worse and worse with time, and that's going to affect their productivity and longevity. So important to be aware of those potential defects. Now there is a difference between registered stock, show stock, and commercial livestock, right? If you are showing animals, it depends if it's just for your local 4-H, a local 4-H project. There's a range of competitiveness there, and if you're raising animals for show stock, it's pretty important that you are looking for breeding and selecting for good conformation. Same with registered stock or breed registry. If you have registered, like a registered heritage breed, those have to be up to breed standards. So it'd be important to familiarize yourself with those. Commercial stock, no matter what, I want to see some good conformation, but it doesn't have to be to the extreme of show livestock. And honestly, with a lot of show livestock, it can get so extreme that it does affect some productivity. So there's always a balance of making sure that your animals are practical, but that they're healthy, they can move, and they're gonna last a long time. And you want them to look good. good conformation is more value and money for you as well if you have to sell in the future or sell offspring. Some points to check. Obviously, it's a little bit different between the species, but just in general, mouth and teeth. You're not going to go up and be able to check a heifer's teeth necessarily, but if you're buying a breeding ewe, I would want to check the teeth and make sure that they were in good condition. We'll talk about mouth in a bit, but you want to make sure that that palate has good conformation. You don't want them to have a jaw that's misaligned in any way, because that's going to affect their efficiency when eating, and that can be an issue later on. Of course, hooves, legs, and joints. You want that animal to be able to move freely and comfortably. You want to look along the top line of the animal. You want it to be nice and smooth. We'll go into species details there. You want the neck to tie in well to the shoulder. For example, some sheep and goats can get kind of ewe-necked, and that isn't a trait you necessarily want. Bone, muscle, and fat cover. If you're selling animals for market, you want those animals to have the bone structure that that muscle can develop well over top of, and you want some fat cover as well, especially with breeding animals. You don't want them to look like they aren't that they're unthrifty, that they're going to take a lot more feed than others do. You want them to be in good condition and look like they're going to be an easy keeper. Some animals just keep their condition well. Others, you have to feed them a lot extra to get up to that good condition. Frame size, it kind of depends on your breed characteristics, your purpose, what you're doing there. Sex characteristics, you want your males, your bulls, your rams to be heavy muscled. If you're going for market, you want them to look really masculine and rugged. Those are characteristics that are sought after, and they typically reflect in the performance data as well. For example, sheep, their testicle size, the data proves that, the bigger that testicle size ratio is, the more successful they'll be reproductively and be able to cover more females, and also just be more productive in that sense. And then in general, balance and style. It's up to you how important that is with your operation. But in general, again, that balance and style, there's a reason we like it. It's because typically it does reflect back in their performance. And so that's something to look for. So we'll start getting into the species a bit now. All livestock species vary widely between breeds. It's very dependent on the focus. If you're looking for wool or meat or something that's dual purpose, if there's a heritage breed or a hair sheep, those different groups will have different recommendations for what you're looking for. So get familiar with those registry lists. Those breed associations will have very detailed, what am I trying to say here? They'll have detailed characteristics that they are looking for. So here in these pictures, if you don't mind saying it into the chat, what differences are we seeing here between the sheep and the pictures? What do you notice? You can also unmute as well if you prefer that. Or if you want to be shy, that's okay too. But it does make the class go by easier. Okay. Fiber opportunities, color, the fleece, fiber type. Absolutely. Yeah, there's some shorn animals, and there are some that are shedding those hair sheet. Yeah, we got females. We've got a ewe with 2 lambs there. There are quite a bit of differences. Thank you very much. Those are perfect. Yeah, so there really are some differences. For example, if you look at the corner in the bottom right, that's a show lamb being shown for market. And so with that case, muscle conditions can be really important, and as is that kind of show type conformation. It's got a really, really straight strong back. It gets deeper as you go from the neck to the hips. And the angle, I'm not sure if can you see my highlighter here? Okay, I get a nod. Okay. So if you look from kind of this hip to the tail, there's very little slope. And by that, I mean it goes out pretty straight, right? Compared to this lamb here, the top of the hip to the tail, you get more of a slope, right? So technically, you want to have, you don't want to have an extreme slope there, but also getting to the extreme of being really straight here might give you some difficulties lambing if that that slope to the hip is so straight. That can happen. So it really depends. It's up to you what your purpose is. If you're raising club lambs, this is what you want to go for. If you have a commercial flock, this isn't somebody that you need to cull just because there's some slope to that hip. So now if you have this female here and there are other issues with her, then I maybe cull, but we can get into that later. So a lot of differences. It really depends on the breed and the purpose of the lambs that you have. Some other overall things with sheep, you like to see a wedge, and the wedge is from the point of the shoulder going back to the flank and the hip. And so what I mean by that is there should be kind of a triangle shape here. You kind of see that where she's gets deeper as you go, deeper as you go from the neck to the flank or the neck to the her hooks and pins here, her hip. So there's kind of a wedge here, wedge shape. And you get a little bit of a wedge shape here. This is a market lamb, so it's just pretty heavily muscled throughout, but there's still a wedge. You'll see some animals that are pretty tubular, where they don't get deeper as you get back to that flank, and that isn't something that you want really in any scenario, because you want your breeding females to have capacity to be able to carry lambs, and so that's what this is here, is there's plenty of capacity to have twins or triplets even. When you get really tubular, that's a less productive animal, and it would also be less productive market-wise because there's less muscle and depth there. So it's something to think about. You also want to see a wedge from above too. You don't want your lambs to be so thick in the shoulder and then maybe narrower in the hip. You want them, if you're looking over the top of them, you're standing behind them looking over the top, you want it to wedge towards you as well. It's a good sign. All right, so talking about some conformation and feet and legs, we have some differences here, but these really are can be used across species. If we look here, this is the correct, got really big all of a sudden. This is the correct form you want to see. Here we're getting calf knees, so that knee is going backwards, and that's not what you want to see. It's going to cause longevity issues over time when traveling and walking. That will just get more severe as they age. Weak in the pasterns. Right here, this is getting weak. It's getting closer and closer to the ground. And buck knee, that knee is going forward instead of being aligned. So you've got correct, this knee is getting back, the knee is getting forward, and then weak in the pasterns. And that's really across most species. Same with we have side view here of the rear legs. This is correct. This position here is nice and straight from the back of the flank all the way down to the pastern right here. It's nice and straight. Over here you get it, and I kind of describe it as the animal looks like they're kind of walking up under themselves. Those back legs are kind of up under them. They're not coming down under their hip bones. You know, if you're kind of going straight down from the hip, this foot's quite a bit forward. You can see that angle there. And then this is an extreme where it's post-legged. So it's really, really straight. It doesn't have enough flex, and where you really see this is when the animal's moving, when the animal's walking. It's not being able to reach forward It's post-legged. It's kind of a good way to describe it. Looks like a post. Looking at the front view here, you have some of these kind of like that knock kneed. You never want any of the legs or feet to interfere with each other. That's going to cause issues down the road. You don't want your hooves to be turning outward or inward in these two examples. And this is the correct form. You want those legs to be pretty well straight there. And again, here you got kind of bow-legged, and then cow-hocked, I think is the term. But all things to look for, and that's why it's really important to watch those animals move. I talked a little bit about mouth, and with sheep and goats, it's really important because sheep can be parrot-mouthed or monkey-mouthed. There's different terms for them, but this is hereditary. I've had people on farms where they've never had this problem. They get a new ram who was not parrot-mouthed or monkey-mouthed, but that gene was somewhere in there, and maybe the lambs that he's throwing have the issue. And so that's something you'd want to find out. That's why record keeping is really important, because if you know that you just got this new ram and that's when you start to see it, that's the potential cause. So parrot mouth is when the lower jaw is farther back than the top. And same here, monkey mouth is the opposite. So it's pretty big underbite. So underbite versus overbite. And the reason, other than, it just looks funky, is because it affects how they eat and how efficient they are. So if their jaw and their teeth and their mouth pad are out of alignment, they might not be able to chew, to pull, and to masticate and digest that food as well. So they might require more feed or different type of feed, or some just might not ever be as thrifty as others. Body condition scoring with sheep, it's more difficult than other livestock most of the time, because they aren't shorn, or they aren't shorn close enough to typically body condition. But here are some examples of some shorn sheep illustrations of what you should be looking for. With sheep, in the US, we use a scoring system of 1 to 5, 1 being emaciated and 5 being obese. And so you really want to be on average a condition score of 3. And it really depends on the time of year and the life stage. But if I'm selecting animals, I'm going to pick 3s and 4s, because it's a sign that they are efficient with their feed. They're easy keepers is the term I use, where some animals just look good more often than others, and it means that they have more muscle and fat coverage, and they're going to perform better.
Oh yeah, body condition scoring. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear other people are using it. It's great. It's a great tool. Now, I say this, and there will be times, especially like after weaning and after being at like peak lactation and feeding twins or singles, your ewes could get into a body condition score 2. And that's normal, because their feed demand is super, super high. They're producing a lot of milk, and those nutrients are going to the lambs. But then you might want to move into a body condition score of 4 towards the end of the pregnancy, towards that last third of pregnancy, because you want to make sure that they are in a good condition before they have to start lactation. So that's kind of how you can use the score sheet. Same with before breeding. If you get into breeding animals, you want to make sure your sheep are probably like a 3.5 for breeding, to make sure they have plenty of fat reserves and muscle to get through the breeding season, where they'll be using more energy. So because most of the time you cannot tell, it's harder to tell for a lot of people with sheep if they aren't shorn. The other way, and really the more tried and true way to body condition score sheep, is by feeling over the loin. So over the loin is between the last rib and the hip bone. So you can feel that with your hands. And you're going to feel over the spinous process, which is really just the spine, and the transverse process. So the vertebrae in the loin have that top ridge, and they also have the transverse process, that bone structure that goes horizontally. So you're going to run your hands and fingers over that area to feel those indicators of how conditioned they are. So you're going to start by, oh, here we have it. You're going to feel that spine. And most of us, I think, you can feel your own spine sometimes in parts or of animals if you have a pet. That spine should have those ridges, right? And then the transverse process, if this is the loin, you're gonna roll your hand over the side of it to feel the transverse process. And that is this bone right here, transverse process. So after you've felt the ridge on the spine, you roll your hand over that loin to feel the edge, and you're trying to feel this bone, these bones here, that vertebrae, the edge of the vertebrae. And then you just in general kind of feel over the top of that loin for fullness of muscle and fat cover. And here are some examples of what different body condition scores should feel or would feel like. So if you have a condition 1, it should be pretty obvious just from looking at them, but also you're going to feel those spine ridges really, really defined. It's also going to be kind of like a steep on the edges of the spine. You're really going to feel this ridge here. It's going to be very obvious. They're not going to have a lot of thickness over their loin. It's going to be pretty shallow because there's no fat cover, and you should be able to feel every single transverse process pretty sharply as well. As we get into a body condition score 2, you still feel that spine transverse process. You use pressure and you can feel the individuals, but they're not as sharp. You can feel those individual vertebrae not as sharp there. Body condition score 3, the spine is a lot smoother. You can still feel it, but maybe you're not feeling those ridges as deeply. Sometimes an example is if you make your hand kind of into a fist like this. Kind of example is the ridges between your knuckles. They're pretty defined when you have them like this, versus if you do the tops of your fingers. I don't know if you can see on my hand, like the edges of your fingers. You can still feel that there are separate fingers there, but it's a lot softer. And then you start getting into animals a lot more fat coverage, and it feels like the top of your hand, where you can kind of, feel there's tendons, but for the most part, it's pretty smooth. I'm not sure if that's a good example. That's kind of how I think of it, as the differences between those vertebrae. So what you want to have is those 3. You have to use some pretty hard pressure to feel those transverse processes. The spine is a lot smoother. When you get into 4, you really can't feel the spine as much. You just notice that there's a line, there's a difference there. And you really can't feel those transverse processes, maybe with some pretty serious pressure, but it's not obvious there. And in a 5, it's going to be pretty obvious if it's a 5. The spine is now just going to be a dimple. It's going to be a really flat back, and there's no way you can try to get that transverse process. So if you want more information on body condition scoring, you'll get a copy of this presentation, and I have things linked. So there's a whole article on it, and it includes kind of conditions to maybe go into different life stages into. And another tip is it is always cheaper, and this is with most livestock species at all, it's always cheaper to maintain the condition than it is to increase. So instead of kind of yo-yoing and having your animals go up and down, it takes a lot more feed to increase, to make a big jump between scores than it does just maintain a score. So, it might seem like you're having to put a lot more in more times during the year, but overall, it's easier to maintain a score. Okay, another group with a lot of variety are goats. There are meat goats, fiber goats, milk goats, just weed eaters, dual purpose. This is where if you have a particular interest in a certain breed, it'd be really beneficial to look at their specific breed characteristics. Goats are typically steeper rumped than sheep. As you can see here from their hooks to pins, so their hip bones to their pelvic bone, that's going to be steeper. So if you're looking for goats and you're like, oh man, it's really steep, it's fairly normal for goats. The most important thing with any of these characteristics is really comparatively. So if you're in a pen, one's a lot steeper or a lot more shallow body than the others, that's when you're going to notice it and can avoid those characteristics. But yeah, we have some very different looking goats here. In general, a lot of the things are the same. You want your females to be deep bodied. It's not going to be as quite of a wedge with goats because they like to see the slope from head to tail. It's going to go down versus in sheep, it might be a little bit more level until you get to the hips. But in general, a good looking animal with good conformation is going to be similar clues to look for. These are the diagram is of a dairy goat. These have some examples here of this is our ideal doe here, and her top line is nice and smooth. She ties in well from her neck to her shoulder. As we look along the top line here, this doe is weak in the chine. There's a kind of a break. You can kind of see that break in that top line. If she gets really heavy with a pregnancy, this is going to become more and more severe. You can see where structure kind of plays a role, and as she gets older, it will get more severe, and it could can be passed on to other progeny or to the kids. So it's important to look for that. Steep rumped compared to this doe here. There's a shorter, thicker neck. That's getting pretty nitpicky, but in general, you want, this is going to sound silly, but you want your female livestock to really look refined, which is funny to me. But you want them to be trim, have feminine features, and where it really comes into, it makes it a lot clearer is when you're looking, between a buck and a doe. You don't want your does to have big blocky heads and really thick necks. You want them to look more refined. And here is an example of that sickle hocked where instead of coming down a little bit straighter, here that foot is forward, has a lot more bend compared to a straight or more correct leg. Over here we get into that post-legged where we lose this kind of nice bend here. We lose that bend and it gets really straight. And again, watch that doe walk and you'll notice it a little bit more too, but she's going to be a lot less flexible. She's not going to be able to travel as far or as long as a doe with correct leg placement. And right here we have more of a roach top where it's a little bit more hunched. There's not a break, but it just doesn't have that nice even slope back to those hips. And yeah, so again, it's hard. It takes a while to learn. So that's why I really recommend going to your breed registries or your specific species pages, going to some livestock shows, or just seeing animals on farm. An extension, we do try to have some on-farm, hands-on activities. We just had lambing school last week, and so we did talk about body conditioning scoring there. So get any opportunity you can to visit farms and learn from others. When it comes to the dairy animals, I won't get into it as much into the dairy just because it's its own world. But in general, if you're having dairy goats, you want them to have a globular, big round udder, even in uniform teats. You don't want, you want to make sure they're all functioning, or at least you have some straight teats that are pointing down. You don't want them pointing out or pointing towards their stomach. That means it's going to be harder for those kids to latch on. They're going to be less efficient. Okay, so when it comes to meat goats, you want your animal, again, you're looking for animals that tie in nicely between their neck and shoulder. You want them to be have kind of an even straight top line. And another reason that's important is because it's indicative of good muscle development. Because if that animal is muscled, that that muscle is going to make that top line a little bit more straight. And over the top, if you're looking, if you're standing behind them, looking over the top of them towards their head, that muscle is going to come off as more it's gonna kind of have a pop to it, right? It's gonna be straighter, like something like this versus a U shape. When animals are kind of U-shaped, sloped off the sides, it's an indicator of less muscle. We'll have some examples of that. So what are some differences you notice between these four market goats, these four meat goats? And we'll just be talking about it as a group so we can kind of see, getting into seeing some differences here. Spine shape, yeah. Let's see, in one particular, let's see, we can kind of see, yeah, there's that kind of break in a top line here. You can kind of see some more here. Leg positions, chest strength. Yep, those are all good. So yeah, you want to look at, and part of it too with show animals is when they're stopping them and holding them and bracing against them. Sometimes the legs are, going to look more far back than if they're just naturally standing on their own in a pen. If it's for market, if it's for meat, I want to look for muscle. So I want to look at depth of body. I want to look at the thickness of like their rump or their flank. Like this is kind of a good indicator here. Things are maybe a little bit tighter. But let's take a look at another point of view. Okay. What does somebody notice in this picture? Somebody want to call something out? Narrow hips of 2, right on the money, Adam Sunshine. Thank you. That is the first thing you should notice about this class. This goat, I mean, it's really narrow between the legs, and the narrower they are, the less muscle they probably have, or the less muscle they'll be able to put on. Really narrow here. And it kind of seems, at least from this point of view, its legs are kind of up under itself a little bit. We've got a lot, it looks from this point of view that we've got a lot steeper of a rump here, especially compared to some of the others in the class. Let's see, do you notice one with a lot of rib or maybe some muscle down the top line? So yeah, you want your animals to have a bold sprung rib, which means, at the base of the spine, those ribs are popping up and over. So that's where you're kind of getting that nice pop versus sloped. So this number 2 here, there's really no pop. It's pretty much just sloping right down the sides, even over its rib on the U shape. Whereas maybe this one is real obvious in this picture where it's nice and round and it's coming right out of the spine. It's nice and kind of flat along that top. There's a lot more muscle development there. All right, so if you were going to be purchasing these animals at the market, who might you pick? Or who might you not pick? You can say either in the chat. Or you could rank them if you're really brave. Okay, we know Adam isn't going to buy number 2, and I would agree with that. Again, what we're looking for is, I think the biggest clue is from behind, just super narrow. There's not a lot of muscle and meat on this animal compared to others. From the side, well, there's some depth of body right here, but I'd like to see that top line a little stronger. Yeah, let's see. People are liking number 3 and number 1. Yeah, and let's see. Oh, worst to best. Okay. Thank goodness, Amber. I was worried there for a second. Okay. So worst to best. Yeah, there's some differences here. I think there's an easy winner and an easy loser. The losers too, as we have talked about, I think 3 is the most muscled. So if you're looking over that top, look how wide and kind of flat that top looks. It means there's a lot of muscle growth there. And even throughout the hips too, if you look kind of right here, if you were going to put a measuring tape around this leg, that leg is a lot more muscle than this one for sure. When I talk about animals that get a little tubular, I kind of think of 4. He doesn't get a lot deeper as he goes down. He's pretty even, like this would be a little rectangle here. So he's not quite my favorite either. You look behind him, his legs are a bit thinner. He's got less muscle along the top. So if I have to buy one of them, I'm going to do 3 first and then one. One's still pretty good muscled, has that depth of body. I maybe like him to tie in a little bit smoother from his neck to his shoulder. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's kind of the example here where you can see it just, and this is getting really picky. I'm just trying to show you guys so you can see kind of different compared, but this is real smooth. So I would go 3, 1, 4, 2. But you just have to see a lot of animals. It takes practice, but just so you can start to think about what to look for. Also, one thing I didn't talk about is bone thickness too. If animals are stouter boned, they're probably going to be able to put on more muscle and be just a heavier, better performing animal. But some breeds and for a lot of commercial flocks, you don't need the biggest boned sheep to be able to reach your goal. So it just depends what you're looking for. Okay, getting into beef cattle now. Again, a lot of differences, right? And we are looking for capacity in the female. A deep body, deep-sided female is going to be able to have a nice, big, healthy calf. We've got a nice, strong top line here, well muscled and good condition. It's a good sign to me. But again, there are differences. Some people really like the Highland cows. They're really cute. They're great for agritourism. And you might just have a strong connection to the breed. You know, you might be Scottish, you might just really love them. There's all kind of differences, different breeds to get. Looks like we might have some Dexters down here. They could be, this is just an image I pulled, so I could be wrong. But you might want a cow that's maybe a little smaller, a more moderate frame. Maybe you don't have the pasture, the feed to fill out a really big framed, long cows. You want something smaller just for your family to have something in the freezer, or again, maybe just you really love the breed and you want to get involved. So there's differences, but no matter what, the female should have, you want the female to have capacity. You want them to be able to walk and move, and just overall have good conformation for their purpose. Here's what some of the structural defects look like in cattle. It's a nice correct angle to the foot and leg here with these pasterns. Right here we have too much angle. This is where it's getting weak in the pasterns. This is getting a sharper angle, and the dew claws are getting lower and closer to the ground. And here's that post-legged where it's going to be too straight. They're not going to be flexible, have as much flex, move out as well. And again, these examples of correct, too straight, post-legged, sickle hocked, where they're kind of up and under themselves, and this is a weak pastern as well. And then from behind, correct, you really want those legs to be pretty straight and even versus bull-legged or cow-hocked. Just for heifer purposes, again, each breed's going to look different, but you want them to have a feminine head. You want them to be pretty neat and tidy and tucked in the front. You don't want them necessarily to have this really big, deep brisket. That's not as beneficial in the females. Neat and smooth over her shoulder. You want her to still have that bold sprung rib, deep bodied. She's gonna be able to have good calves there, be able to less issues with dystocia probably. Productive appearing udder. You want her teats to look uniform, normal, long stifle, correct hocks, and correct structure in her feet and legs. These drawings are a little rough here, but in general, here's just some examples of that more masculine, rugged look, heavy muscling, big bones. They're going to be sound reproductive organs. If you're buying breeding, especially breeding males, you want to get that performance data. They should have data of even progeny or a lot of different things. You might have had tests done, EPDs, estimated performance data is what that is, and you can get them on with breeding males. So going into seeing some differences here, um, we have two steers that are about the same age. What are some differences you see? You can put those in the chat or unmute yourself and call it out. What do you notice between these two? Or maybe just of one. You don't have to compare. You can just call something out. Okay, that's quiet on this one. Okay, depth of rib, brisket, muscle definition. Great. Left has a more curved spine. Sure, I can see what you mean there. Absolutely. Yeah, let's talk about it. So, I think we're talking about this top line here. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but yeah, this one has a very, very straight top line. We can give that steer that. We can say that's a pretty straight top line. I might argue that although this one has a little bit of curve here, this steer does have a lot more muscle definition. I think in general, it's just better condition than the other calf is. In terms of balance, this steer looks really nice where you've got really deep chested, deep bodied, a lot bolder sprung of a rib. We're not behind us, so we can't tell as well, but just the way the light's hitting it and how deep it is compared to this steer. What I can really tell with this steer is its hind end looks like it's a size too small. It's kind of pinched right here in the loin. It looks like it maybe has a belt cinched on it, and there's just a lot less muscle and condition on this calf. In terms of balance, I'm going to go with this one. Yeah, I know what you're saying here on the top line. That top line could be a little bit stronger, but in terms of balance and looks, this is the calf I'd choose. And here is a finished steer, just to kind of give you an example of, if I'm choosing that first one. The question is, are they comparable, same age? Yes, they were comparable, the same age. These are pictures from when I managed a steer a year program at Montana State. And so we got these calves in, and they were pretty dang similar in terms of ages. We got them all at the same time of year, and they had to be within a certain window. So that's a really good question to ask is when you're comparing animals is, if one's a lot younger, you can give it some more grace for being smaller, not having as much muscle definition. But if they're the same age, you don't want to pick the one out of the herd that's a lot smaller and just seems a little bit more unthrifty. So here's the finished steer of that first one, or pretty similar of what you would expect to see. Because this animal is deep-sided, has a big frame, had a strong top, and deep, especially over here in the hip and through the flank, that animal has a lot more muscle on it and is what you'd want to see. Okay, now we have some heifer classes, which these ones give you an idea of what you can look for and see. So we're gonna watch these videos and excuse the commercials here. But I guess I just want you to kind of watch these animals move. Again, judge from the ground up. Watch their feet and legs. Watch them move. Look at them from behind, the side, and just maybe on a scratch piece of paper, you could rank them from best to worst. See if we can get close from what we've been talking about. And it's okay if it's not close. It took me a really, really long time and a lot of classes to be able to select livestock. So don't get discouraged, but just helps to keep an eye on what to look for. All right, so that was number 2. We'll go to 3 now. All right, last one. All right. What do you think? Does anybody feel like sharing in the chat? And you don't have to give a full order if you don't want to. You can just say what you like or what you don't like. Somebody's saying 1. There's another number 1. 3, a 3. Okay, perfect. Yes. 1 and 3 are the heifers I'm going to take home. I think either or both of them are still really, really good. If I had to choose between the 2 of them, I'd probably pick 1. I think she has more muscle to her. I think she's gonna uh, throw some really productive, well-muscled calves. I think 3 is or 3 could be even maybe a little more on the feminine side. Both are really, really good. You know, can't be too picky on those 2. Let's see, 1 seemed to have a wobbly gait. To watch that one through again. But yeah, it's good. It's good to check oh, you saw that too? Yeah. Good thing to keep an eye on. Yeah, in general, I just think she's the most productive heifer. She's the heaviest muscled. She's got a really deep body. She has a bigger body, I think, than 3, but 3 is really neat. I don't want to discredit her too much either. When we get to 2 and 4, we just have, they're a lot less muscled. Did somebody notice some things about number 4 particular? Narrow hips for sure. Sure. Yeah, I think and along the spine, yeah, I think she's the lightest muscled, got a bit of a slope. Yep, she's not as strong topped as the other ones. And when she stops, if you notice, there's a few times where she stops where she doesn't have a back leg kind of outstretched, but her legs are ones that I think she really gets under herself, where you're not seeing that. Of course, this isn't the position to be, but this leg here, let's say that she's standing, we should really see this leg match up, and her feet always kind of seem to be up and under her. And in general, she's just not as yeah, doesn't have as much muscle, as much condition, she has as much depth of body. 1 and 3 are just kind of the best balanced, and the ones that I would choose. So good job to the group. Okay, last but not least, we have swine or hogs. And again, a lot of differences here depending on purpose and breed. Again, a lot of the things are similar, even though they look a lot different, is, you want your hooves to be straight and facing forward. You don't want them splay-footed or pigeon-toed. You want that hock to come down in a correct structure. You don't want it to be too forward, sickle hocked. You don't want them to be low in their pasterns at all. You want them to be weak. You don't want them to be post-legged. This is soft pasterns in the rear legs. They're saying, they might keep it if it's like depending on the breed. I don't know if it's that weak in the pasterns early on as a young animal. It's not something I would want to keep. I would want it to be much more upright. Again, if you have breeding females, you want them to be deep bodied. You want them to be long. You don't want them to be pinched or tight over the loin. It's hard without going into super detail on market hogs or breeding hogs. So I have some more information on gilt selection from the pork checkoff that you can look into. But again, we can kind of look at some examples. I think that's the best way to learn. So here we have 4 gilts, and so gilts are breeding females, or like they haven't been bred yet. This will be their first season. And again, you want them to be deep bodied. You want to have room for plenty of offspring. They have big litters. You want them to have muscle as well, be correct in their posture, their structure. Anyone want to throw out what you see here in this class? Something you noticed so far? We'll show another view soon. Bottom left corner looks the most balanced. Yeah, we've got some depth, we've got some muscle tone, nice and smooth. But kind of showing from this angle here, looks like we have some muscle. She has some meat on her bones as well. I think we have a hog in the class who is the shallowest bodied here, maybe has the least amount of muscle, but we're going to wait till we see the other viewpoint. But just look at the depth of body difference between, say, this one and this one here. But it's always important to get lots of views. That's why seeing the animals in person is important. Okay, so now we get to this view, and I think there are some animals. Does somebody want to call out who might be have the least amount of muscle tone or least muscled animal, judging by kind of the angle or the slope off the ribs? Number 2. Okay, star students. Yes, thank you, Misty and Amber. Number 2, it's just kind of that, I'm picturing that U shape where there's just not a lot of spring outside that rib. There's not a lot of muscle, not super strong on top. Even throughout the hips, and that ham, right? That holiday ham that's going to be here is just lacking definition, lacking size here compared to some other ones. This gilt here, that's where you have that really bold rib. There's plenty of muscle, nice strong top line. And that is combined with the side view where she's also really deep-bodied. More deep-bodied than 4, definitely more deep-bodied than 1. So I'm going to put 1 and 2 down, 3 and 4 up. But I think 3 is for sure the choice I would make. Now, when you go and you're purchasing animals, they're not all going to look like this. Again, it's comparative. Make sure you're buying from somebody who is experienced and can talk to you, but also just look for some of these indicators as you go. Okay, so what questions should you ask when you go to a farm to purchase livestock? Maybe you'll take your iPad like this person did, but all right, so questions to ask. Get records. Ask about birth date, vaccine history, any big animal health treatments. If they have performance data, like rams or bulls will have performance data. I can tell you if it's a breeding female and she's already had offspring, has she the size of the litter, or if it's a sheep or goat, was it triplets, twins, singles? Regulatory animal health program tags. So heifers have to be vaccinated for brucellosis or for bangs, and they will have a bangs tag. That is important to know. Scrapies, having a scrapie tag for sheep. That's proof against the vaccine, but it's also really important for tracing if there are any issues. And so when you are purchasing sheep over 18 months old, they should have a scrapie tag. And that is the responsibility of the seller. So make sure, and it's really when you start asking questions, if the person has a lot of this information, they seem prepared and ready, that's a really good sign. If somebody doesn't know or they're not they're kind of reluctant to give up information, red flag. If anybody's trying to make it seem, this is like with anything in life, if somebody's trying to make you feel rushed and like not give you time, that's also a red flag. If you are particular about a certain breed and it's important to you that the animals are registered, you need to get that information. Disease test results or not necessarily results, but like proof of Banks vaccination. Read up if you're with sheep or goats or even cattle as well on Johne's disease, gastrointestinal disease. It's really important and it can be devastating if it gets to your farm. So just do a little bit of research there. It's also important to have a relationship with a veterinarian. We talked about that in the preparing for livestock class earlier in the series. Your veterinarian will be able to work with you as well in terms of, what's important for your area for animal health. Other things I already mentioned, I guess litter size, twin or triplet. If you're breeding dates, if you're buying a heifer that was bred or a cow, it's important to know health history, current diet, know what they're eating. Big changes to the diet can cause stress to the animal and sometimes digestive issues. So it's kind of good to know what they've been currently eating. Reason for selling, I should have had that early on, but yeah, ask them why they're selling. That can give you some clues as well. And temperament. Ask them a little bit about the temperament. You'll be able to see a little bit of it if you're seeing them walk around, move in the pen and on farm. But yeah, you don't want to buy an animal that's dangerous, especially if you have kids or youth or even just for you. Especially with male sheep and goats. You do not want somebody that's going to take you out when your back is turned. Even though they're smaller, they can, really knock you down. You can tear an ACL. Not fun. All right. And what should you do when you get home? It's really exciting to buy livestock, bring them home, but please, please pay attention to biosecurity practices. It's always better to be safe and follow best practices. Technically, this should have started before you left, but since it's at the end of my presentation, I had kind of what to do when you get home. But clean and disinfect equipment before and after the new animal arrives. So get the pen ready if you're pretty sure you're going to buy just in case. Clean out your trailer, disinfect your trailer. Feeding and handling equipment, you don't want to use the same feed bucket. Your footwear, want to make sure you have clean footwear. You can easily make kind of like boot dips as well, like with kind of like a bleach water solution. There's other things as well, but to keep your footwear clean. If you're going on to somebody else's farm, you don't want to carry something back with you to your place. And one tip just in general for working around livestock, but pregnant individuals should avoid contact with pregnant or aborting livestock. A lot of diseases that can cause abortion in livestock can do the same in humans as well. So like just at the lambing school, giving demonstration and preg checking or checking the ewes, one had maybe had a lamb and we wanted to check were there more in there, has she been straining? Was there difficulties with the next lamb? And it's just important to know that those can be transmissible to humans. And if you're pregnant, can be dangerous and you don't want to have any issues. So important thing to know. Other biosecurity practices, when you get home, keep those new animals separate from your other animals for at least 21 days, even up to 30. That's recommended by APHIS. Don't have them in the pen next door where they can touch noses and mouths and share feed and water. It's kind of against the point of having them in a separate pen. Care for established animals first, then your new ones. So if you're doing chores, go do your regular chores, the regular equipment and clothing, and then either clean and disinfect, or it's even easier just to have a separate one and go put on, wash your hands, put on a different overcoat, change your boots even, and then go feed and care for the new ones. Monitor every day. When you have some new animals and you're quarantining them, check them every day. Some snotty noses. One is a stressful event being transported and going to a new farm. That's one of the most stressful times in an animal's life. And so it can cause some health issues, but just in general, you don't want anything else popping up, some diseases that maybe weren't showing when you looked at them, but were showing now. Have an established veterinarian. You don't want to have an issue, but then not have an established veterinarian, and then you're frantically calling around trying to find somebody who can come out, and there might be a long wait time. So it's better to just find a veterinarian ahead of time and have a relationship with them. And then we have some other links here. Biosecurity practices, biggest biosecurity bangs for your buck, like what you can do on your farm that data shows is the best way to reduce disease transmission. And then I'm sure many of you have heard about avian influenza right now in Oregon. Oregon State University has an updated page with symptoms, ways to reduce the chances, and who to call if you do see symptoms or have any issues. So it's important to have. And then remember, just highlighting kind of the main points of today, choose livestock that fit you and your place, select animals, buy animals from a reputable source, make sure those animals are healthy as far as you can tell, select animals with good confirmation for their purpose. They will pay you back if you have animals with good confirmation. Ask a lot of questions. Things can come to light then, and quarantine and monitor when you get home. And with that, we can take some questions. And I think I remember there being a question in the very beginning. I would appreciate any leads on a rental squeeze chute for cattle. That is a good question. I don't know of any on the top of my head. But if you send me an email, some regions have, farmer to farmer email lists. I don't know. I don't know if I've heard about a rentable squeeze chute for cattle off the top of my head. Melissa, have you heard of one?
I haven't, but I do think that just, yeah, asking other people, putting it out there as an ask. So, Steve, yeah, reach out to us. Maybe we have a farmers network in your where you're at, and we could help you put that out there to other farmers to see if they have one that you could use, borrow. People are usually pretty good at sharing if they can.
Yeah, I apologize. It's a little bit of a crash course just because there's so many differences between species and even within species, some pretty extreme differences, but just give you some examples of different animals. But yeah, I have time for questions, so please ask away. This presentation will be sent to you. I have all the links. They will be clickable. The videos will be clickable. I will quadruple check that you can access those videos in there. But yeah, now's the time. Melissa and I both have livestock experience and have answered a lot of extension questions and put on programs, so happy to answer them. And you can unmute if you're not comfortable with typing in the chat as well. And just in general, while we're waiting for a few more questions, I know our OSU Extension puts on a lot of events and classes. We just had lambing school. Also check with your local soil and water conservation districts, your livestock associations, because getting out and getting on farm for farm tours and classes are really helpful. Okay, what if a seller says you can't come to their farm because of their biosecurity practices? That is a good question. I think that there are ways to have people out to your farm without having, it depends on the type of farm. But there are ways you can wear booties, you can clean, have a boot dip there. I don't know. It's just a kind of a red flag to me when you can't go to their place and see other animals and see how things are going. I don't like to meet somewhere with an animal. Because if you're meeting somewhere, that means it's probably going to be in a trailer. You won't be able to see it move out well. It's just kind of a red flag. But
You
I
don't,
would have a
yeah.
conversation with them.
I totally agree, Haley, because you can't see their living conditions, where they're at. You can't see there's other sick animals nearby. So it's just so important to get out there. And I think that most people will figure out a way for you to be able to do that. Maybe promising your firstborn child that you're going to wear boots that haven't been on your own property or clean shoes, or lots of people have foot dips if they're expecting people. So there should be a way to do that.
Yeah, it's just like, yes, the biggest red flag. But like I understand them being concerned, but yeah, you could say I will bring, bleach and water and mix it in front of you and dip my boots in it. Or not touch anything, or park, not pull into the driveway into the farm by the pen, but park in a certain place and walk, there's different things there. Appropriate pricing per species, a general range. That is a good question. It changes all the time. It fluctuates. It depends on the species and also the quality of the animals. So that's where, if you kind of know what you want, the age range, the breed, or the type purpose, that's where it comes in handy to just do some searching on the internet, see what things are. You can also reach out to your extension agent if you have some more kind of specific criteria. Melissa, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, the resource I use often to is market reports. So the Eugene Livestock Auction will publish their current market reports that will give the livestock species and weight range, maybe age, depending on which animals they are, like a range of them, and then give like the average price that they were going for at auction. So you might expect a little more if you're, it just depends. Maybe a little higher cost if you're purchasing from a reputable breeder versus an auction, which is pretty unknown, but that will give you um, some price points to look at.
Melanie asks, how can we learn about breeds that would work best for our needs? I'm wanting to do beef cattle in the Willamette Valley. Um, That's a good question. I will say, especially if you're starting out and if you want to do market animals, if you're looking for more market side animals, I believe in hybrid vigor. So a lot of times, I think when you have crossbreeds, you can get kind of the best of both worlds. And animals that are mixed breeds tend to be, not saying they're healthier, but hybrid vigor is a thing. Sometimes you have less defects, but I'm not saying you have to get a crossbreed. I'm just saying it's something to think about. Um, I think, yeah, just learning about the breed. So if you know you want to do beef, and I would just look at kind of some of the most common ones that do well in the area, look into the breeds, learn more. Temperament can be a big thing. There's big temperament changes sometimes between the breeds. It depends how much pasture space you have. Um, Maybe you need something that's a little bit smaller, more moderate versus the biggest, heaviest, most muscled thing if you just want to fill your freezer. Um,
You might
yeah, just like,
go to the county fair this year and talk to people that have different breeds, learn about them from people that are actually raising them. I find that a lot of people will just go with what they are drawn to, which may or may not be the right solution or choice, but like they really like Murray Greys because they're unique, and so they're willing to pay kind of the cost for some of those fancier breeds. But yeah, I agree with Haley. There's a lot of good crossbred animals out there if you're thinking about starting a small herd.
yeah, it's also like what's convenient. Like who do you have? Maybe there's a place down the road and their animals look really well taken care of and they sell um locker beef and the customer reviews are good. You might, yeah, see what they're doing. Ask. But I like the idea of going to the fair for sure.
And they're willing to bring them to you, maybe. I had
Yeah.
a I had a bad experience one time when we got a couple steers. Um, I didn't know what kind of fencing they were trained to, and our fencing wasn't the best woven wire fencing. Some animals are just so much harder on fences than others, and that's kind of almost like a personality thing, or it's just what they're used to at their home farm. And we put those cows out, those two steers out in a small pasture, and they were over that fence and like in Timbuktu. I mean, I literally hired a real life cowboy with dogs that had like GPS collars to go round up these two steers. Like they were on our property for all of like 2 minutes. It was ridiculous. So I just share that because there's these things that we don't really think about very well. And I should have known better. I do know better, but you know, I figured that they would be fine. And that was a added cost I wasn't expecting. So there's just little things, but I just really encourage you to talk to a lot of people before you make a selection. And yeah, we're willing to have some of those conversations, but you might have friends and neighbors and other people in your community that have some wonderful insight to share.
Yeah, we had a calf who was born dead one time, and we had to go to the neighbor to get a dairy calf to help out, and we got that, and of course I fell in love with it, loved it. But what happens with a Holstein Holstein steer calf is they get ginormous, and yeah, destroyed our fences. So my dad quickly turned it into hamburger when it got big. But yeah, making sure that's the kind of the same thing about your property as well. Make sure it's a good fit for you is, what infrastructure do you have in place? And what will it work with? Or do you have the capital to be able to invest in some different fencing structures? So, okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. A huge thank you for everybody who participated and came and supported our programs.